Hello. On further examination of the 2003 Encyclopedia Britannica yearbook, I have to say that there was a very profoundly interesting and worrying section of the book to do with the Lord of the Rings and the way that artificial intelligence can be manipulated to make a computer simulated character look completely natural and in accordance with all our perceptions of being someone real. They talked about the Lord of the Rings and the elf-like character in there. And they talked about news broadcasters who can seem to be now alive and a person, but who can read the news 24 hours a day in different languages to various audiences and seem like a proper person. Now, it's very dangerous in some ways. It's not only the character that can be artificially created, but the landscapes also. I believe, though I did believe initially that New Zealand was similar, because someone persuaded me to believe that it was similar to the landscape of The Hobbit in places, that much of the landscape was computer simulated as well as the characters. I found later on from someone else who gave me a different story. So there is a danger that people can be drawn on holiday through news reports and all sorts to places that are, when someone arrives there, are completely different, and that they might feel somewhat betrayed by that, or in a situation where they might have even given up their homes and former lives and their country and everything to go to another country, which according to news broadcasts is one way, and when they get there is quite another. So nobody, there is a problem. Some people may have been encouraged to become delusional, and other people may be in denial. Having read that article, when I watched later BBC News 24, and there was a young woman from London reporting excitedly about the protests about the hijab in the Far East, or the Middle East as they call it, don't they? I was worried when I saw how many people there were at those protests. I was worried, first of all, that they may be falsified protests and that there may be occasions, if there are false news presenters, where crowds are presented, because it did say in the Encyclopedia Britannica that they first used this computer simulation technique to fill out extras in crowds in films also, and make it look as though there were whole crowds of people, when in fact the footfall and the payroll was very small indeed. So I hope that young woman hasn't been betrayed into a situation of complete delusionment, and that if the News 24 is telling us that there are large protests, they know for certain that there are large protests. I did bring that up also because, I know this sounds strange, but there have been times when I myself have needed to wear headgear, because I felt some pressure from satellite involvement. Now, I first read many years ago about Greenham common women having been targeted by satellites observing them, or sometimes sort of causing pressure onto their heads, and that sort of people who may be falsely and wrongly suspected of being divergents or insurgents or troublemakers may occasionally be targeted that way. And I have found that wearing a hat, or even wearing a covering, it doesn't have to be a hat, can sometimes it makes it get stronger in response, but sometimes it can somehow fend off some of the sort of sickness and dizziness and so on that's being imposed by the satellites. That might sound crazy. I did notice, though, far from that theory maybe being correct, that many of the men in the video, in the seeming footage from the Middle East, weren't wearing headgear themselves. I used to think that many Indian men used to wear headgear, and people in the Far East and Middle East. I'm sorry this sounds so complicated. But to go back to the Greenham common women idea and reality, I thought that they were chased off and removed as protesters, and that it had all been a huge it was a scandal how much of a failure it was, and that the government had continued to keep the cruise missiles there, and the Greenham common women, although most of them, unlike Extinction Rebellion protesters, did not probably land in prison, they were scared off and forcibly removed, a bit like the kettling thing we saw a few years ago at St Paul's as well. But according to a documentary I watched the other night on Channel 4 about the 80s, it seemed that Margaret Thatcher, I know Carol Thatcher was meant to have been involved in some Greenham Common protesting herself, if Carol Thatcher did exist. And that Mrs. Thatcher, apparently, according to that documentary, did take the case forward to try and negotiate with Russia some kind of disassembling of some of the nuclear weapons. So whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's the first time in my life that I've heard about the Treaty of 1989, in which some nuclear warheads on both sides, both the American side and the Russian side, were disarmed and made completely neutral.